Oh God, that's very loud. Hello. Do I smell or something? I must be very intimidating. There's no one up the front. Doesn't matter. Right, it's my pleasure to be here today to talk to you about dashboards and runbooks. You know, these things, or these things, or these things, or these things, or even this thing if you squint hard enough. I mean, it's still telling you to turn it on and off again. Because as engineers, we seem to love creating these things. We worked out that our engineering team spend about 60 days every week building, maintaining, using these things. And today I want to try and understand why that is, where they can go wrong, and where we can get better. Because there's something interesting there, right? But before we get into all that, hi, I'm Colin. Don't let my weird accent fool you. I'm originally a Kiwi. I'm not British, despite everyone thinking I'm British. I currently tech lead our observability team at Cloudflare. I have strong opinions on mining drills. I come from a mining family. If you want to talk about observability for mining drills, I can talk your ear off about that. But let's start with the story, because I'm well aware that it is the last session of the first day, and so you're probably all incredibly tired of hearing people speak, and my weird, strange accent is not helping that at all. So, start with a story that I've seen play out numerous times before, and I'm sure you have too, so feel free to nod along in approval. It will make me feel better, or you can shake your head in disapproval. I swear it won't get to me, probably. But it starts out, as all good stories do, with a bit of an on-call shift, right? I was on call probably about a year ago now, and my phone exploded around 3 a.m. You know the feeling, right? You're an adult, you think that you're popular enough that one of your few remaining friends actually wants to talk to you, and it turns out it's just PagerDuty slapping you on the face. That feeling. But you get out of bed and you wander over to your laptop and you join the incident channel, and you know what the first thing someone said to me was, because it really annoyed me, it was, have you checked the dashboard? What does the runbook say? And that annoyed me for two reasons. Firstly, it's 3 a.m., I haven't checked anything, and I'm very tired. But secondly, unless channeling my grumpy 3 a.m. old man vibe, we have a lot of dashboards, we have a lot of runbooks, and a lot of them could be relevant to this situation. And so we get into this sort of feedback loop where we get a new incident, and we spend time at the beginning of that incident going through our runbooks, going through our dashboards, looking for correlations, trying to find interesting things, and then we have to solve it as it is, right? A new incident. And then at the end of our incident, with all the benefit of hindsight and perhaps a caffeine or two, we think back and we kick ourselves, because if only we'd had this one bit of information, this one thing to check, this one instruction telling us what to fix, we would have been able to solve it immediately, and people would love and respect us as the all-knowing systems deities we know ourselves to be. And so our dashboards get a new panel, and our runbooks get written, and we build up this documentation. It's like we treat incidents like demons. Like if we know their name, we will have full control over them. And so we write down all of these names, and when a new incident pops up, we just frantically scream them, hoping one is correct. And so our documentation grows organically without any rhyme or reason or logic to it, just tacking on the output of the last incident until it's so overwhelmed with the memory of past incidents that we're spending more time going through it at the beginning of an incident than we are actually solving the issue. And that's why I call this talk Scrapbooking for Engineers. We build up this huge repository of information, these memories of past things, without really any thought as to whether or not it's useful. Right? We can sit our junior engineers around a campfire and we can tell ghost stories about that one System D incident from several years ago, I guess. You know the one. But is that actually useful to keep around? Now, why did I tell you that story? Was it to make some nihilistic point about how all documentation is useless, or perhaps to scare you off of Grafana? Well, no, nothing that serious, because it might surprise you to learn that I quite like runbooks and dashboards when used correctly. And in order to explore what correctly means there, because that's doing a lot of heavy lifting. I want to try and explore first where they can go wrong, because Dante famously tells us that there is 9 levels of hell, but as sysadmins, we know that there is a secret 10 level of hell for bad documentation. And I want to explore what that looks like. And so let's start with the first half of our scrapbook, the dashboard. You'll note that a lot of my screenshots here are Grafana. That's not picking on Grafana folks, so please don't at me. My attempts to move Cloudflare back to RRD have so far fallen on deaf ears, which is very sad. I want to talk about these things first. These things are variables, right? Grafana calls them variables, Nagios, you define templates, RRD, you can do magic with PHP, whatever you want. At any rate, they're all about making your dashboard generic for some definition. We try and preempt what people might want to change about our dashboard, and we hoist those things into variables, and they sit at the top. And this sort of attempts to prevent people needing to make their own things. They can just use our thing, right? So we might have a systems resources dashboard. We can plug in a service name, and we can see all of the resources that our service uses. And you might think this is a perfect solution. Teams don't need to make their own thing. They can just come to my one, and they can plug in their service name. They can get all the answers they want, and that doesn't really work for one very specific reason that boils down to we are not nearly as good at predicting the future as we want to think we are. Your one dashboard is never going to answer every question that a team wants, right? So you might have one team that wants their CPU broken down by data center. Another team might want it broken down by node. Another team might want it broken down by CPU. And as much as you can continue to add panels, we build up this thing that tries to solve so many people's problems that we end up solving none of them well, right? We build up this thing where you're having to tread through huge swathes of information that is relevant to nebulous other teams, that finding things relevant to your service is difficult. And what this tends to lead to is over-templating, right? Where we hoist everything that can possibly change into a variable, which means that we get the sort of same problem where we're having to tread through these huge combinatorics of these variables in order to try and find interesting correlations. There's no discoverability there. And so ultimately we get the side of the coin where our dashboards are too generic. But I want to talk about this one real quickly. This is sort of the opposite end of the spectrum. This is where we have dashboards that are so specific, they're only really suited for one very specific purpose, right? We create a dashboard for every incident. Not everyone, but a lot of them. And ostensibly these are fine, right? They're communication tools. In the middle of an incident, we create a dashboard, we communicate some very strict amount of information relevant to that incident, but they tend to stick around. And no one is ever quite sure whether they're able to delete them, because they might be relevant in the future, or maybe someone's using them, or who knows, right? And so they stick around and they muddy the waters, and both of those problems together end up with this sort of thing. Like, doesn't this look like the old chain email forwards? Like, I feel if I click on one of these, my racist aunt is going to jump out and show me a meme. This is what happens when we guess wrong, right? We get the specificity wrong, we have too many variables, we have not enough variables, we're showing too much information. This is what happens when someone comes along and they find something close to what they want, and they clone the dashboard, right? And this builds up over time. It muddies the waters to make it even harder for the next person to find what they want, and so they clone a dashboard, and this builds up and builds up to the point where we have so many dashboards that it's impossible to find any sort of canonical source of information. But before I have a fit, let's talk about the other side of our scrapbook, the runbook. Or I've seen some companies call it the alert reference, or I briefly consulted with one company that called theirs the sysadmin Bible. Ugh. That company did not last very long, you'll be very happy to know. At any rate, dashboards tell you what the problem is, right? They give you a graph, they say, here it is. Runbooks tell you how to fix it. And at best, they're structured like a decision tree. If this, do that. If you read log X, do whatever Y, or go cry in a corner, whatever. these sort of show up in two different scenarios. The best is when they are a stepping stone towards automation, right? We've had an incident, we're working on a fix. In that meantime, we need to lean on some engineers in order to run some manual tasks. That's fine. But more insidiously, these exist in the long term, and they stick around, and that's for a few reasons. Mainly, engineering teams need to have this sort of culture of automation around not leaning on engineers to run manual tasks. I like to point out to my managers that I'm a very expensive bash script. These things need to sort of, relying on teams to run these things over and over is a great way to burn out your engineers. So I would highly recommend any managers out there, if you do see these sort of things, try and work out how long they've lasted, because I imagine they're burning out your team. But we also get these sort of things. This is sort of in the middle ground, right? It requires a bit more of a human touch. We have to go read something, we have to go correlate something with our weird human eyes that are really good at pattern matching. It requires a bit more humanity, and these, again, sort of hit this dual-sided problem of dashboards where either they're really generic or they're really specific, and these really specific ones, well, they should be turned into these automatable ones and then automated, right? And the really generic ones sometimes look like this. And this is a real runbook I've seen. I'm a pacifist, and I do not advocate violence, but if you see something like this, find it, who wrote it, and just slap them, because they do not respect your time. These are purely a management failure, right? They exist to tick a management box. We had an incident, we needed an alert, we needed a runbook just to tick that box. Here it is, I guess. Good luck to the on-call engineer trying to run that one, right? And again, these things stick around. These ones are surprisingly prevalent. You'd laugh, but I've seen these at more companies than I would really hope. And so we get these sort of three classes of alert reference, right? Of a runbook. We get these automatable ones, we get these freeform ones, and we get these useless ones. And that kind of hints at an interesting emergent property, right? If all good runbooks are automatable, why do they exist? It sort of hints that any good runbook should necessarily be transient. To act as this sort of stepping stone between we've had an incident and we fixed the issue and we need to lean on our engineers. And so if you have these sort of long-running alert references, you need to really ask yourself why. Is there not a culture of automation? Is there not some sort of automation framework like we've seen in the last talk? Either way, there's cultural learnings to be had there. But if these things are so difficult to get right, then why bother, right? We keep doing it. I'd like to try and understand a bit of why. And firstly, we've uncovered a good use case for them, right? Dashboards, runbooks for good short-term communication. If we have a very specific amount of information that we want to communicate over a very specific amount of time, then dashboards, runbooks, they're your tool. But we've also uncovered some less than scrupulous sort of types of them, right? And I'd like to try and understand why we make those. And I think, firstly and foremost, and most lizard brainy, it kind of feels good, right? Particularly as a back-end engineer, creating something that has this sort of immediate visual feedback that isn't just a log line in a terminal, that feels good. And I think there's the reason behind this, because front-end engineers consistently perform better on job satisfaction surveys. And I think having this sort of creative outlet is definitely part of the reason why. But at the same time, we create these things because we've always created them. Right? Dashboards, runbooks, they predate our industry by hundreds of years. I've got a good friend in New Zealand who writes runbooks for old DEC mainframes. These things exist, and they have existed for a time immemorial. And we create them because that's what we were told to do. As little baby junior sysadmins, we were told to create a dashboard, create a runbook. And I think there's a certain level of cargo culting there, because we've never really stopped to understand why. And I'd like to try and challenge that. And it's a common exercise. when you are designing a system, you go through and you try and understand the failure modes of that system. Right? If you haven't done it formally, I would highly recommend it. You can play it like D&D, so get out your D20s and give it a try. But if you haven't done it formally, you've almost certainly done it informally, because the output of that process, an understanding of the failure modes of your system, or at least an attempted understanding, that necessarily informs your metrics, it informs your logs, it informs what telemetry you export based on what you expect to fail. And that necessarily falls through to your dashboards, and it falls through to your runbooks. It informs what graphs your dashboard has, and it informs what logs your runbook tells you to check, and it presents to the outside world that you fully understand the failure modes of your system. And I think that's really comforting, to be able to just sit in this mindset of, I understand this. And when that inevitably fails, when we don't understand it, because these systems are stupidly complex, right? When that fails, all of this falls down. And so perhaps we could do better. Maybe. Let's explore that. And I think as a first step, if we want to keep these things around, establishing this sort of life cycle, as we heard in the previous talk, establishing when these things are created, how they are maintained as your service changes, and defining when they're deleted. You'll note that throughout this whole talk, I've been referring to these things as documentation, and that is because they are, but so often they are not treated as such. They're always kept as this sort of other weird opsy thing. They don't live next to your service, and if instead we brought these things in line with the other documentation of our service, we would be doing ourselves a big service. At the same time, we've seen how attempting to solve everyone's problems means that we solve everyone's problems badly, right? And so there's a lot of tools coming up in the industry that allow us to build this sort of composability. We've got things like JSONet, we've got things like Pulumi that allow us to provide, particularly as an observability platform team, these sort of building blocks for other teams to build their own stuff, rather than providing a fully featured thing that doesn't quite solve anyone's problems. At the same time, taking a step back, and rather than trying to chase incidents, taking a step back, defining what success means, and we've got our stereotypical SLIs, SLOs, but there are other frameworks out there. Defining what success means and alerting on failures of that success, that starts to get us away from this idea of chasing incidents and having a runbook for every possible thing that can go wrong. And in that way, we've sort of backdoored and round the world at our way to observability, right? Because we get into this situation where this pre-instrumented telemetry, these metrics, these logs, and falling through to our runbooks and our dashboards, they cause this sort of tunnel vision where we try and frame the world through our understanding that is informing all of these things. And if we look forwards into our observability world, right, we sort of try and shake these shackles a bit to try and move ourselves out of this predefined telemetry, out of our channeling of our vision into runbooks and dashboards, to try and understand the world as it is, that there are problems that we have not understood yet. And so we get the stereotypical, we move into events and tracing over metrics and logs, rather than trying to preempt how your system will fail, exporting everything and aggregating outside the fact. That allows us to sort of shake off these dashboards and shake off these runbooks, and instead focus on discoverability and explorability and the ability to move through this sort of telemetry we export to find interesting things as they happen, rather than trying to define what interesting means up front. And I think there's a lot of tools around that. We have things like Grafana's Explore view as a baseline, but a lot of observability SaaS companies will let you just fire open telemetry spans at them these days and show you some sort of discoverability. And I think there's some interesting stuff there. But that's about all I have. I haven't yet uploaded these slides, but that's my slides page. I think there's some interesting moves there around where we can go as an industry, trying to shackle or de-shackle ourselves from this sort of mindset of trying to define things up front and moving into this brave new observability world, and I'm excited to see where we go.